I want to look here at this concept of patience, godly patience, and look at the big picture. What does it look like in the kingdom, right? And what does it look like to be given a dream and see that dream come to pass, and all of the steps in the middle? And I do this because, I spend my days hand-holding Christians in business, mostly, through all the steps to build a great business. And that requires, some strategies that are purely money-based because they've got to run a business. And some of those strategies are spiritual because they've got to, they want to use their business for good. But one of the ongoing things that I am up against forever and ever, amen, it seems, is this need to have everything really quickly. And, I guess here's my summary. I kind of think that wanting everything really quickly, that is a pattern of this world. And you and I are called not to conform to those patterns. Society wants us to have everything in 5 minutes. It wants to convince us that, it's all attainable really quickly. And if we just do these things or buy these products, then we'll get exactly what we need. And yet, when I say quickly, like I'm talking, if you think you're going to do anything great in a 5 to 10 year window, you're kidding yourself, right? You might do some good things in that time, but I'm talking about taking a step back and something that's got legacy and something that's sustainable and something that's bigger than us as individuals. We've got to pound that thing for 5, 10 or more years before it's going to be anything that we can kind of take a step back from and go, far out, I've built something great with the Lord. And so, most people are trying to build a business and make it, phenomenally profitable or something, in a 2 to 3 year window. And here I am constantly going, well, hang on a minute. If you wanted to go and learn a trade, and do an apprenticeship, you'd do 4 years of learning the trade before you ever come out and start. And in those 4 years, you make no money because you're getting paid to learn. And then people think they can go into business and in 24 months try and kill it and then get upset and frustrated when it's not happening. And so here I am kind of going, listen, we've got to be in it for the long haul. We've got to be prepared to pay the price. We've got to build that internal fortitude, and we've got to look further out on the horizon. And so that's really what I wanted to make today's episode about, I'm all for hustle and work hard and put it all in an intense period of time. But even with that, I think that's a necessity. But even with that kind of work ethic, it's still going to take a long, long, long time. Okay? And so I just want to have a look at that and from a biblical perspective and then kind of bring it into look at the Old Testament, look at the New Testament, have a bit of a play around, draw some pretty things on the iPad, and then, and only then, I will take your questions. So, if we're going to look at patience from a biblical perspective or being in it for the long haul, there's a whole bunch of people we could have gone to, right? It took Noah 60 or 70 years, we don't know exactly, to build the ark, right? And that's a long time. And, he had to plant trees because the kind of wood that he was told to make it out of wasn't available and at the scale that it needed. And so there was no Bunnings, there were no chainsaws, so all things took a long time. So we could look at a whole bunch of people, but one of my favorite stories of patience, and I'll explain why, because it wasn't just a vision and an outcome over a period of time. There were some other dynamics in this story that I think we'll be able to relate to, is the story of Abram, who becomes Abraham and has a son called Isaac. So let's have a bit of a look. It's quite a protracted part of the Bible to kind of pick, because there's a few stories that move into one, but I kind of want to have a look at this because I want to put into perspective just how long it takes to see fulfillment, in the kingdom. I think things are a little bit different. And so here we go, right? We start the story at Genesis 12:1, so we're starting here, and it's called God's promises a nation to Abram. And you know this story, right? It goes like this. The Lord had said to Abram, get out of your country, from your family, and from your father's house, to a land that I will show you. And this is where it gets really serious. I will make you a great nation. Now, understand, Abram at this point is 75 years old, and he has not had a son. And God comes to him and says, I'll make you a great nation. I'll bless you and make your name great, and you should be a blessing. So you've probably heard that bit before. And it says, so Abram departed as the Lord had spoken to him with Lot, who was his nephew. And then Abram took Sarah and his nephew and all their possessions, because they had a lot. And they basically went to the land of Canaan. All right, so that's really cool, right? So we got the story here. 75 years old. God says to Abram, I will make you a great nation, and he's like, far out. That couldn't possibly take place. All right. Now, fast forward a little bit. So then we have the story, the story of Hagar, and it finally has Ishmael, kind of born out of unrighteousness. Then they go back to Egypt. Then they separate because their land is too much. And then we go a little bit further. And then if we get to Genesis 15, and then we'll pick up at number 4. And behold, a word of the Lord came to him, saying, this one shall not be your heir, talking about Ishmael, but one who will come from your own body shall be your heir. Then he brought him outside and said, and this is a beautiful part, look towards the heaven and count the stars if you're able to number them. So shall your descendants be. And so God kind of takes him on this journey of discovering, what it's going to be like, to have these children. And so God just didn't do it with words. He also, had this intimate way of showing him exactly how this was going to be. All right. So fast forward, right, to that. And then when Abram was 99 years old, 75 to 99, here's a bit of a clue here. Some of you are like, yeah, okay, that's a long time. The Lord appeared to Abram and said to him, I am Almighty God, walk before me and be blameless. So that was the promise. The promise was, you be blameless and I'll give you an heir, and I will make my covenant between me and you and will multiply you. So it's basically saying again. And then he changes his name, right? You are no longer going to be called Abram. You're going to be called Abraham. And Sarai is no longer going to be Sarai. She's going to be called Sarah. And I'll bless her and give her a son by you. And she will be the mother of nations. And that's a beautiful thing. Then Abraham fell on his face and laughed. So pick this part up of the story, right? So, God says to Abram at 75, you're going to be father of many nations. At 99, he says, right, now time is on. You're going to have a child. And Abraham laughs on his face. And he said in his heart, now that's interesting because he didn't say it with his mouth. He said it in his heart. But God knows all this stuff. Shall a child be born to a man who is 100 years old? And shall Sarah, who is 99, bear a child? And so that's really interesting, because have you ever found yourself kind of laughing in despair or laughing in frustration when God gives you a massive vision for your business or for your influence or for your future, but it's such a protracted time that you let unbelief and almost, this childish thought process, of how could this possibly be, just laughing, that can't even possibly take place, So here is Abraham, who was Abram, speaking to the creator of the universe, who has seen nothing but miracles his entire life and prosperity and all these things. And he is doubting that God can give him a child, even though he's been through all that stuff. It's madness when you look at it in retrospect. And so Sarah also laughs in God's face and says, me, I'm an old lady. This isn't going to happen. But then the story goes on. A few more stories. You got Sodom and Gomorrah happens. And then finally we get to Abimelech, which is an amazing story. And then finally it says that so he has the son Isaac. God says you've got to circumcise everybody in your household, every servant that you've paid for, every male, and then obviously Isaac on day 8 gets circumcised. And then we get to this point. So you ever wonder, you have this big vision. Along the journey, it's so long, you have doubt. You get to the point where you see the vision come to pass. You see the provision of God. Can you imagine it would have been like the fulfillment of his life to see Isaac and to meet Isaac and see that God was so for him, and yet that's not where the story ends, because Abraham's faith needs to be confirmed. Now it came to pass after these things that God tested Abraham and said to him, Abraham, and he said, here I am. Then he said, take your own son, your only son Isaac, who, doesn't say this, who you have waited 25 years for. whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains, which I'll tell you. So Abraham rose early in the morning, saddled his donkey, took two of his young, and met with him, and son Isaac. They split the word. You know the story. And then just as he was about to do exactly what God said, God said, don't lay a hand on him, look over your shoulder, and there's a ram in the thicket. I look at that story and I think there are so many elements to this. There is a promise right back in the beginning. There is doubt that creeps in. There is a long period of time between the fulfillment. And then finally, just because God wants to test our heart, will we finally take the blessing or the promise or the vision and lay it on the altar, knowing that our identity is not in that, it is in the fact that we serve a good God. And underpinning all of that is a promise that came to pass, and God provided so that he didn't have to do anything to Isaac. I wonder if you're sitting there right now and you're thinking, well, God's given me a massive dream for my life. God's given me visions and dreams that are so ridiculously big that they can't possibly take place. And I've been going 15 years and it looks nothing like what I promised. Well, let me tell you, old Abe had the same situation. And even though he had unbelief and sarcasm crept in, God still worked with him. So even as you've doubted, it's not like it can't happen for you. All right? This is the beauty of the dad that we serve. And so I guess in anything there is a gestation period, right? Between the vision and the fruition, there is a period of time. And if you look at a child, obviously it's 9 months for the most part. If I was to look back at the vision that God's given me, and I talk about it all the time, so it's no surprise that I fully reckon that we can raise up enough kingdom entrepreneurs in Australia and beyond to be able to use that as a powerful force to advance the kingdom, to love people, to make enough money to fund strategic projects and all that. I've been given, and now I've seen that much of it come to pass after pouring myself into this day and night since 2012. So, it's ridiculous, and yet I'm in it for the long haul. And at the end of the day, my obligation is to work hard and stay in the game, and God's obligation is to kind of get me to that point. So when I look at this gestation period, I'm nowhere near all the way through it, right? It's 9 months to have a human, but it's been 7 years for me to get this far in my vision and the things that he's called me to here. And so, and I think the gestation period is there for a reason. If we draw some similarities between childbirth and a great vision for a life, there are, I listed a few things here that, and by the way, I don't feel super qualified to talk about childbirth, so I won't go into too many finer details because I haven't actually given birth to anyone yet, but I have been there for 3 of them, so I do know a little bit, so we'll keep these nice and general because I don't want to be an expert on a topic I've got no idea about. But there are pains that take place through that time, right? There are pains that take place through gestation of a child, and it's exactly the same. There are pains that will take place between God giving you a vision for your life and actually seeing it come to pass. Lots of pains, daily pains that we've got to just be okay with, and discomfort. But there's also, it's time to mentally prepare. I know from my experience when Kimberly first said, we're pregnant and having a baby, which by the way, we were 12 weeks married. I don't know if any of you can beat that. If you can beat that, if you can beat that whilst you were married, then let me know in the comments. So we've got to mentally, but 9 months it took me to get my head right to have a baby. I think just typically blokes are a little bit slower on the uptake, and so it took 9 months for me to mentally prepare and soften and understand there's a child coming and it needs nurture. And so, God could probably gestate a human in, 3 minutes if he wanted, but it takes 9 months, I'm sure, for the bloke to catch up. Then we have to physically prepare, there was time, make the nursery and choose the colors and, all that physical preparation that needs to take place to be able to do that. And I think one of the reasons why it takes so longer is to get more clarity of the end game. As the 9 months took part between finding out we're pregnant and actually having our daughter on our 1-year wedding anniversary, you start to do more research and learn more things. And, I remember researching what's it like to be a dad. And there were some Christian books written for fathers. And so I was reading all of this stuff and I was learning and I was getting a clearer picture of what it was going to look like when it came to pass. And that's the period you're in. You're in that period where it's painful, it's discomfort. You've got to mentally prepare. You've got to physically prepare. You're getting a clearer picture. And then it's going to come to pass. Okay. But it's not going to happen overnight. And that's one thing that just proper ticks me off. It really, really, really ticks me off that we live in this world where everyone's trying to race it, you know. Everyone thinks that, you know, if you start a business, you should have a private jet and 3 Lamborghinis by Friday. Let me tell you, anybody putting out content right now that tells you that you should have a Lamborghini is of the wrong spirit. Not because you can't have a Lamborghini, but because it can't be the focus. All right, you know, and one of my favorite things about what we're doing here is trying to drown out the noise of these numbies who are operating in the patterns of this world. You know, what's super exciting for me is if you look at right now, today, whatever today is, when you're watching this today, one of the little mindsets that keeps me focused to be able to want to do Business Greenhouse and achieve my mission, you know, is that I'm 40. I'm fully happy if this takes me to I'm 90. I'm happy to grind every single day for 50 more years or until I go on to glory. Is just this simple understanding that my life is not my own. I gave up rights to my own opinions the day I laid all of that down. When the old man died and the new man came forward, it was a life of service to the King. And so I understand that along that life of service to the King, there's going to be days that absolutely suck and I hate them. And there's going to be days that are absolutely wonderful and I love them. And it's going to be a melting pot of those two things. And there's always going to be things that suck and there's always going to be things that are great. And I don't mind living in that place. And the Apostle Paul was the same. You know, God gives him a vision of taking the gospel to Jew, Gentile, and King. And he had a horrific time with shipwrecks, floggings, skin hanging off him, you know, in jail, bound. But at the same time, you know, crusades and salvations and changing culture and the same thing all into one life. And a long period of time between getting the vision and going home to glory. But he just did it consistently. And so this is what I would say to you. If I was going to draw a little chart, probably should use the little iPad thingy here. All right, so if we've got a chart here, and right here is a timeline of your life. All right, timeline of the life. And let's say this bit right here is today. Well, here's my question for you. Where are you living? Because if you live out into the future, then you will be permanently frustrated. If you live far too far into the future, like when God gives you a vision, it's for a time in the future. It's not to be frustrated with that vision because it's not here today. That vision is for a time. Your job is to get yourself along the journey, getting yourself prepared and learning and all those things we said to be able to handle it when it turns up. So if you live too far in the future in your mind, you'll be frustrated. Why isn't it here? Why isn't it here? Comparing yourself to everybody else. But if you live too far in the past, then you're only going to live with a whole bunch of regret. Should have done this better, should have done this better, should have done this better. What the Apostle Paul was phenomenal at doing was living in today. Because what he said is, I've learned to live with lots, I've learned to live with little, and ultimately it doesn't matter because I'm just happy with where I am right now. And that's where I think we need to get to. We need to get to the fact that actually I'm not where I used to be. I'm better, I'm smarter, I know more of the Lord, I trust him, I've seen more miracles, I'm not the same person. But I'm not where I want to be, which is exciting because it's going to drag me forward to a bright future. But I am where I am today for a reason. And my obligation today is to get myself more and more prepared for when that vision comes to pass, because if I'm not prepared, it can't happen. So that's the role of today. Build your business, do the work, manage the cash flow you do have, and don't be frustrated about the cash flow you don't have. Just manage it well so that you're preparing yourself, bigger business, better leadership, better things. And that's what's going to prepare you for that vision when it comes to pass. Because if you've had a promise and you've had a vision and you've got an exciting future ahead of you, it's going to happen. If you do the things that are going to happen, but it's not going to happen quickly. Everything takes time. And in the kingdom, a protracted amount of time. Why? Because God wants our character more than he wants our accomplishments. And he doesn't want to give us an accomplishment when our character can't handle it. And that's the name of the game.